Probably the number 2 fish of the lowland zone was golden perch. Throughout most of the basin, golden perch are abundant in lowland habitats. Perhaps the exception is Victoria. In Victoria, in many lowland rivers like the Lower Ovens, Macquarie perch were probably more common than golden perch, though golden perch had a significant presence. Upstream of the lowlands, well, in Victoria, golden perch were not a common fish above lowland habitat. They certainly were present in the Goulburn up to about the Eildon area and in the Ovens and the lower King River, but in no historical account are they described as being particularly common. In New South Wales, golden perch were very common in the slope zone and in some cases reasonably common in upland habitats. But for the most part, what we'd say about golden perch is that their presence upstream of the lowlands was strongly linked to floods. When big floods came through, golden perch would migrate in large numbers upstream and be caught in some numbers, but then for many years would be scarce in those higher altitude habitats. So out of all the larger native fish, the historical evidence points to the fact that golden perch were probably the scarcest upstream of lowland areas. Fish that's often forgotten are silver perch, commonly known as grunter, silver brim, sometimes black brim. So what did we learn about them? Well, prior to this project, they were thought to be very much a fish of the lowlands, and that is true. Throughout lowland habitats, they were generally common or very abundant, particularly in areas where the water was moving. They seem to favour running water. Upstream of the lowlands, what turned out as a surprise for many people was in Victoria, silver perch had at least a modern presence in slopes habitat waters. So there's a good newspaper account of them in the Campaspe River, historical accounts of them in the lower Mittamitta River. In New South Wales, silver perch managed to find their way up in numbers to significant altitudes, so they were found nearly to Cooma in the Murrumbidgee River. And in fact, up to the 1960s, there used to be large migrations of silver perch up the Murrumbidgee, and anglers would regularly catch them. So their presence upstream is often linked to migration, but overall the evidence points to them being generally more common upstream of the lowlands than golden perch. One of my theories for the decline of silver perch is this, that I've done a fair bit of work with silver perch in fish hatcheries, and their eggs are described like golden perch as being pelagic or buoyant. They float in the water column. Well, everything I've seen indicates that's very much not the case. Golden perch eggs are buoyant, silver perch eggs are not. So I suspect that silver perch for their spawning require strongly running water to keep their eggs agitated and off the riverbed. And I suspect that with the construction of weirs and the reduction of flows in some rivers, that when silver perch spawn, their eggs fall to the silt and get smothered and disappeared. So I think there's some evidence that a reduction in flows has been a factor in the decline of silver perch throughout the Murray-Darling Basin. Another fish associated strongly with the lowlands are catfish. And catfish suffered from a bit of an image problem. They don't look like a normal fish, they have an eel-like tail. They have 3 spikes in their fins, which if you get jabbed by the spikes, they inject a mild toxin that causes swelling. So they're the ugly duckling of the native fish. But a lot of people remember them fondly as being a superb table fish. In some cases, people used to catch them and sell them in the Depression to provide income for their families in tough times. One of the best fighting fish found in the basin. And until this project, catfish were very much stereotyped as being a lowland fish living in the slow, sluggish rivers and particularly in billabongs and lakes. There was really in Victoria only one historical account suggesting that they might have been found elsewhere, and that was Bert Mackenzie's account of catfish being present in the lagoons along the Goulburn River between Eildon and Seymour. And A lot of people dismiss that as an aberration. And along the way in this project, I found more and more accounts from people remembering catfish being common in the lagoons, not only along the Goulburn, but on the Ovens, on the Mitta River, and Len Lebner's stories of catfish being common in the creeks and anna branches around Corryong in the upper Murray River. The thinking's turned around from a very minor presence in the slope zone to actually quite a strong presence, particularly in the creeks and the lagoons adjacent to slopes rivers. And one thing that's fascinating about catfish is they actually lay their eggs in a nest. The male fish collect stones and build something like a pyramid about 1 metre in diameter. And the female comes in and lays the eggs in the nest, and then the male chases the female off, and the male then tends to the eggs for a couple of weeks where they hatch. And I've seen those nests in the rivers, and they're fascinating, but the poor old catfish has undergone a dramatic decline over the last 100 years. And in fact, in Victoria, there were massive fish kills of them in 1908 and in the 1920s, and since that time they've been very rare anywhere upstream of the lowlands. So some of the stuff on catfish has in fact been a revelation. I've got a story from a man on his deathbed in Benalla, Frank Cook. He was in his 90s, and he talked about how the creeks on the Broken River upstream of Benalla were once full of catfish. And I had doubts about it. It was the only historical account of catfish being that high up the Broken system. But I still put it in the original draft of my book, and then a few months later I found a newspaper article describing catfish being common in those creeks around Lima and Swanpool. So there again, the oral history of the anglers was right. They really were there. So catfish have been very much a revelation in terms of where they lived in this project. And that's all of the fish done. Funny story that my mum relates. This might say something about my dad. His honeymoon was he took mum camping here on the Goulburn River, so fishing was even a priority on his honeymoon. And he told mum a yarn, don't go swimming in the river, it's full of catfish and they'll attack your ankles.